He needed a fake wife to deceive his own family at his brother's wedding. She just wanted to save her grandmother's bookstore from going bankrupt. When their worlds collided in an unlikely contract, no one could have predicted that true love would bloom from the biggest deception. But between rehearsed smiles, touches that weren't part of the script, and truths whispered off stage, everything started to spiral out of control. But what happened next, no one could have imagined. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments, where are you listening from? Your support is what keeps this channel alive. For a man renowned for commanding boardrooms and outmaneuvering Fortune 500 rivals, Alexander Sterling felt strangely cornered by something as simple and as old as time itself, family expectations. The Chicago skyline outside his penthouse stretched like a glittering sea of control, order, and power. But inside, where silence reigned and shadows shifted across sleek furniture, he felt none of it. It all started with a single sentence from his mother that morning. "Darling, please don't arrive alone to your brother's wedding," Eleanor had said, her voice soft as silk and twice as sharp. "It's becoming tiresome, as if his solitude were a stain on the family legacy." But Alexander knew what she really meant. It wasn't about appearances, it was about control. She wanted heirs, a match worthy of the Sterling name. And somewhere in her grand design, she still held hope for a reunion with Victoria Langston, the polished heiress who once wore Alexander's arm like a designer clutch and left behind a trail of betrayal so perfectly executed it could have won an award. Victoria would be at the wedding, of course she would, and Eleanor would be watching. It wasn't enough to survive the weekend, he needed to win it. Alexander poured himself a glass of scotch, neat 2 fingers, no ice, and stared at the folder Sarah had left on his desk. "Discreet options," the tab read, underlined in her handwriting. No nonsense, just like her. He opened it. Professional actresses, all of them. Stylish, trained, beautiful in a way that photographed well but never surprised. Bios full of minor movie credits, modeling gigs, and the occasional soap opera role. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt grounded. He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pulling at the edges of his mind. Sterling Innovations was launching a new software division next quarter. Investors were circling. His time was currency, and yet here he was, picking out a fake fiancée like a suit for a gala. A knock pulled him from his thoughts. Sarah walked in without waiting for a response. She always did that, part loyalty, part impatience. "You didn't like them," she said, nodding toward the folder. "I need someone real," he muttered. "Not another performance." Sarah raised a brow. "You are literally hiring someone to perform. I mean someone who doesn't feel like a performance." She didn't argue. Instead, she pulled a second folder from her bag. Plain manila, no label. "I didn't include her originally," she said, placing it on the desk. "She's not an actress, not even close." He looked at her. "She owns a used bookstore in Wicker Park," Sarah continued. "Her name's Isabel Rossi. I met her last year when I was searching for a first edition for my dad. She helped me for an hour, then gave me a discount I didn't deserve. She's kind, natural, a little chaotic, but charming." He opened the folder. There was only one photo. Not a headshot, but a candid. A woman standing barefoot on a step stool reaching for a book. Her dark curls had slipped from a loose bun. Her cardigan was mismatched with her skirt, and she had the kind of smile that looked like it had come straight from a secret memory. Something in his chest shifted. "She's not polished," Sarah said, reading his silence, "but she's real. And she needs the money. I called her, told her it was a last-minute engagement party gig. She said she'd meet you, but only if it wasn't indecent." Alexander blinked. How much does she know? Enough to be curious, not enough to say yes. He stared at the photo. There was a crooked stack of books behind her, and yet all he could see was the softness in her expression. It disarmed him. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she looked like someone who didn't care to be. "Set it up," he said quietly. Sarah tilted her head. "You're sure?" "No." He exhaled. "But do it anyway." That night, he couldn't sleep. He tried. He paced the wide expanse of the penthouse, read half of a quarterly report, even considered replying to one of Victoria's emails still sitting unread in his private inbox. But he didn't. Instead, he poured another scotch and stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring at the skyline. He remembered the last time he saw Victoria, at a charity gala in New York. She'd worn red, like she always did when she wanted to be remembered, and when she smiled at him from across the room, it had felt like an old wound splitting open again. His pride said nothing. His chest, however, told another story. He had spent years building armor, cold success, precision routines, no surprises, but now he was voluntarily inviting a stranger into his most personal circle, to lie for him, to pretend affection, to fool his mother, his brother, even himself. It was madness, or maybe it was survival. He found himself looking at Isabel's photo again. The irony wasn't lost on him. She wasn't the woman who belonged in his world, not according to Eleanor, not according to logic. And yet, there was a flicker in his gut he couldn't quite name. Anticipation, doubt, hope. The intercom buzzed the next morning. "Mr. Sterling," his doorman said. "Your 11 o'clock is here. Isabel." He adjusted his cuffs, glanced once more at the mirror, and whispered a silent prayer he didn't believe in. When the elevator doors opened and she stepped in, everything slowed. No heels, no perfume. Just a soft yellow dress, a worn leather satchel, and that same quietly powerful presence from the photograph. She looked at him, not past him, not through him, but at him, with eyes that didn't ask for anything. Just saw. "Mr. Sterling?" she asked. Her voice was gentle, but steady. He nodded, clearing his throat. "Thank you for coming." She smiled faintly. "Your assistant said it was urgent." "It is," he said. "But also strange. I know that." She tilted her head. "You need someone to pretend to love you for a weekend." Her words landed with the force of truth. "Yes," he admitted. "It's absurd, but it matters." "To you?" she asked. He hesitated then. "To my family. To what's expected of me." She studied him for a moment, not with judgment, but curiosity, and for the first time in years, Alexander Sterling felt exposed. "What would I have to do?" she asked finally. "Just attend a wedding, smile, hold my hand. Pretend we've been together for 6 months, I'll provide a script." "And what will I get?" $15,000, no questions asked, no strings attached. A contract, of course, clear terms, no involvement. She raised an eyebrow. "Emotional or physical?" "Both," he said quickly. Isabel nodded slowly. "And if I say no?" He smiled faintly. "Then I'll have to call one of the actresses. And pretend this idea wasn't the first time I've felt slightly human in months." She looked at him again, really looked. And in that moment, in the quiet space between them, something unsaid hung in the air, like a question neither of them knew how to ask yet. If Alexander Sterling had expected someone polished and rehearsed, Isabel Rossi was the complete opposite in every way. She walked into the penthouse like someone who had never been in one before, because she hadn't. Her gaze moved slowly across the marble floors, the minimalist furniture, the high ceilings that whispered wealth, but her steps didn't falter. She didn't fidget or adjust her clothes nervously. Instead, she inhaled, deep and calm, like someone committing the air itself to memory. "Beautiful view," she said softly, turning toward the windows. Alex studied her from a distance, taking in the simplicity of her appearance. Brown curls pulled back with a fabric clip, a linen blouse tucked into high-waisted jeans, a satchel bag that had clearly seen better days but carried a kind of humble charm. She didn't wear perfume, just the faint scent of lavender and something like ink and old paper. It was oddly grounding. "You're not what I expected," he said, before he could stop himself. She turned, one brow raised. "And what were you expecting?" He offered a tight smile. "Someone a bit more trained for this." Isabel didn't blink. "I'm not here to impress you, Mr. Sterling. I'm here because your assistant said you needed help, and I need the money." The words weren't cold. They were honest, clean, delivered like a fact she'd long made peace with. Alex gestured toward the couch. "Shall we sit?" She took her place with surprising grace, crossing one leg over the other and setting her bag gently beside her. He followed, settling into the chair across from her, holding the contract folder in his hands. "I want to be up front," he began. "This is not a game to me, it's a means to an end. I need someone to act as my fiancé during my brother's wedding this weekend. Nothing more, no misunderstandings." She nodded. "I assumed as much." He opened the folder, sliding the contract toward her. "Everything is here. $15,000 wired to your account on Sunday night. We'll rehearse a backstory. You'll meet my family. There will be questions, photos, eyes on us at all times." Isabel flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning quickly. She had a quiet intelligence, one that didn't flaunt itself, but couldn't be hidden either. "No kissing," she said aloud, pointing to the clause. "That's right. No sharing rooms? We'll have adjoining suites, locked doors, privacy respected." She looked up. "You thought of everything." Alex hesitated. "I've done this kind of planning before." That made her pause. "So, I'm not the first?" "You are," he said quickly. "But I've planned business deals that required a similar performance." She gave a small nod. "And your ex-girlfriend will be there?" His jaw tensed. "Yes." "Is that what this is really about?" Isabel asked, her voice calm but piercing. "You want to make her jealous?" "No." He met her eyes. "I want to be free of her, and of everyone expecting me to bring her back into my life." She didn't press further. Instead, she leaned back, folding her arms lightly over her chest. "I'm not an actress," she said. "I know. I'm not used to lying." "You won't have to lie," he replied. "Just act. Be present. Laugh at a few of my jokes. Pretend we have history, that we like each other." Her eyes twinkled slightly. "Do you tell good jokes?" Alex smirked. "I can be surprisingly charming when cornered." A soft smile crept onto her lips. It was the first real one she'd offered, and it changed everything about her face. She was beautiful before, now she was radiant. He cleared his throat, glancing down at the contract. "Would you like more time to read?" "No." She slid it back to him. "I've read it. I'll sign." He blinked. "Just like that. I'm 3 weeks behind on rent," she said quietly. "My landlord is threatening to sell the property. My bookstore is my grandmother's legacy. If I lose it, I lose a part of her." Alex's throat tightened. "I'm not ashamed to take this opportunity," she continued, "but I'm also not pretending this is normal. I'll play the role. I'll be convincing. But I won't become someone I'm not even for you." He nodded slowly. "Fair." She reached into her bag, pulled out a pen and signed her name at the bottom of the last page. Just like that, they were in business. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with something neither had asked for. Respect. Unexpected, unspoken, but very much real. Alex stood. "We should rehearse our story, how we met, what we like about each other, favorite memories, that kind of thing." Isabel smiled again, but this time with mischief. "Let me guess. You were reading poetry in a bookstore when I dropped a cup of coffee on your shoes?" He raised a brow. "Actually, I was thinking I rescued you from a mugging in Central Park." She laughed, light and warm. "Too dramatic. Let's keep it simple. You came into my bookstore looking for a rare first edition. I helped you find it. We started talking. You came back every weekend until one day you brought coffee and stayed all afternoon." He blinked. "You're good at this." "I'm a storyteller," she said with a shrug. "It's what I do every day." He looked at her more carefully. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you." For a moment something shifted. The city hummed outside, the sunlight caught in her hair, and Alexander Sterling, who had built an empire on logic and calculation, found himself completely disarmed by a woman with ink-stained fingers and no filter. He had hired her to be invisible, to be a temporary solution. But something told him Isabel Rossi might become the most unforgettable part of this entire plan. The rain in Wicker Park came without warning, gentle at first, like a whisper, then louder, heavier, until it drummed against the faded awning above the front door of Rossi Books. Inside the small shop, the scent of old paper and wood polish lingered like memory. The bell above the door had gone silent that day. No customers, no noise. Just the quiet ache of time running out. Isabel sat behind the counter, her grandmother's teacup in her hands. Cold, untouched. She'd brewed it out of habit, not hope. The final notice sat beside her. 3 weeks overdue, eviction imminent. She had read it 12 times already, as if repetition could make it gentler. But the truth was as brutal as it was simple. She couldn't keep the shop. Her grandmother had left it to her not because it made money, but because it had soul. A soul Izzy had spent the last 3 years trying to preserve. She had taught children to read in the corner by the window, hosted poetry nights with tea lights and jazz records, repaired bindings with glue and prayer, but none of it paid enough. The city had grown harsher, rent had risen, customers had dwindled, and now her last defense was a contract signed with a stranger in a penthouse in downtown Chicago. $15,000 for 3 days of pretending. She leaned back, eyes on the stained glass lamp above her. She'd said yes because she had no other choice. But now that the ink was dry, panic began to crawl under her skin. She had always been independent, proud. Her mother had called her stubborn. Too much heart, not enough sense. But what sense was there in watching everything her grandmother built crumble because of pride? Izzy closed her eyes. She could still hear the conversation from that morning echoing in her head. "You don't have to do this," her friend Jess had said, watching her pack a weekend bag. "I do. You could ask your uncle, or take out another loan. I've asked, and the bank said no. Again." Jess had crossed her arms. "So you're going to play someone's fake girlfriend for money? That's your plan now?" "No," Izzy replied quietly. "My plan is to save the one place in this city that ever felt like home." Now, as thunder rolled in the distance, Izzy looked around the shop one more time. She touched the shelves, her fingers running along spines she knew by heart. Austen, Garcia Marquez, Baldwin, Sagan. Every book held a story, and every story felt like a small piece of her. She slid the final notice into the drawer and stood. Time to become someone else. The boutique she visited was far from her world. Glass walls, pristine lighting, mannequins that looked like they belonged on magazine covers. The woman behind the counter stared at her for a moment too long before offering a rehearsed smile. "Can I help you?" Izzy hesitated. "I need something elegant, but not loud." "For an event?" "A wedding," she said. Then quickly added, "I'm the fiancé." The saleswoman's expression changed, respectful, impressed. Izzy didn't correct her. An hour later, she left the boutique with a fitted navy blue dress, a pair of heels she could barely walk in, and a knot in her stomach that wouldn't leave. That night, back at the shop, she stood in front of the mirror, hair curled, makeup lightly done, the dress hugging her figure like it had known her body longer than she had. She didn't recognize herself, and that terrified her more than she expected. She wasn't playing a part. She was wearing a mask. And worse, she didn't know if she could take it off when it was over. The next morning, Sarah picked her up in a black car with tinted windows. The ride downtown was quiet. Sarah gave her a folder with details, names, dates, anecdotes she'd need to memorize. Alex's favorite wine, where they'd met, the imaginary vacation to Napa Valley. "You'll be fine," Sarah said, glancing over. "You're more convincing than any actress we've ever hired, because you're not pretending to be perfect." Izzy didn't respond. Her stomach was too tight with nerves. When they arrived at the Sterling Tower, everything felt taller, shinier, more fragile. Marble lobby, gold accents, an elevator that moved like a whisper. At the top floor, the penthouse doors opened, and there he was, Alexander Sterling. He wore a charcoal suit, shirt crisp, no tie. His sleeves were rolled just enough to make him look relaxed, but the watch on his wrist reminded her of the world he came from. Controlled, polished, untouchable. "You look..." He hesitated. "Like someone else?" she offered, arching a brow. He almost smiled. "Like someone who's going to ruin every plan I've made." "Is that a compliment? Ask me again on Sunday." They moved to the sitting area, the skyline painting the windows behind them. He poured her tea without asking. "Jasmine." She blinked, surprised. "You remembered." "You mentioned it," he said. in passing. The smallest detail, and yet it landed deep. They began rehearsing. How they met, what they loved about each other, their first fight about whether The Great Gatsby was overrated. Alex had notes, dates, timelines. Izzy had stories, colors, emotions. She interrupted him more than once. "No one believes a man like you walks into a bookstore every Saturday for poetry." "I like poetry," he protested. "Then quote one." He blinked. She laughed. By the end of the second hour, the backstory felt almost real. "Do you always prepare this much?" she asked. "I don't believe in improvisation." She leaned in. "Then maybe you've never lived." Their eyes locked. A pause, just long enough to notice the silence between them. Izzy pulled back first. "I should go pack," she said. "I'll send a car, 7 a.m. sharp." She stood. So did he. Their hands brushed briefly as he handed her the folder. Neither spoke of it, but both felt it. And as she stepped into the elevator, the mirrored walls reflected not just a woman dressed for a lie, but a heart already bracing for something it hadn't agreed to feel. The Sterling family driver arrived at exactly 7 a.m., as promised. A black sedan waited outside Isabel's apartment building, its engine already humming like it had better places to be. Izzy stood on the sidewalk in a simple beige trench coat, suitcase in hand, watching the city wake up around her. She had barely slept, but her eyes were sharp, her posture steady. No one would guess that her stomach was turning itself inside out. As the car pulled away from Wicker Park, her gaze lingered on the disappearing silhouette of her bookshop. She didn't know whether she'd be coming back to a second chance or a quiet goodbye. At the penthouse, Alexander Sterling opened the door himself. Not a butler, not Sarah, him. That alone made her pause. He looked tired, not in the physical sense, but in the way someone looks when their thoughts haven't left them alone all night. "You're early," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "You're surprised?" "Most people show up late when they're nervous." She gave him a pointed look. "I'm not most people," he smirked faintly. "That's becoming alarmingly clear." The living room had been rearranged. A soft leather sofa now faced a coffee table scattered with notes, photos, and a hand-drawn diagram of their relationship timeline. Izzy blinked at it. "You color-coded this?" "I run a billion-dollar tech company. I believe in systems." She walked over, picked up a photo, one Sarah had taken the day before, of the two of them standing in front of the Sterling Tower. It looked surprisingly natural. His arm was around her waist, her hand resting lightly on his chest. They were both mid-laugh. She hadn't realized she could look like that next to someone like him. "I've already memorized most of this," he said, gesturing toward the timeline. "Of course you have," she muttered. "We should rehearse. The wedding's tomorrow. I need to know how you'll respond under pressure." "You mean in front of your mother?" she corrected. Alex gave a short laugh. "Among others." They sat, close but not too close. He asked questions, she answered. "When did we first meet?" "April 12th. You wandered into my shop looking for a rare edition of Leaves of Grass. You were charmingly confused and kept calling it Leaves of Grasshoppers." He raised a brow. "That wasn't in the file." She shrugged. "I added color." He studied her, not with irritation, but curiosity. "You're improvising already." "It's called making the lie believable. Real relationships are messy. They have awkward beginnings and inside jokes." He paused. "What's our song?" "Fly Me to the Moon. You hummed it while browsing. I teased you for being cliché. You said you only hum when you're nervous." He stared at her. "I'm beginning to suspect you're better at this than I am," he murmured. "I'm not pretending to be in love with you," she said simply. "I'm pretending to know you. That's different." But the moment the words left her mouth, the air shifted. Thicker now, more charged. They ran through the story again and again. Each time the lines blurred a little more. At one point he reached for her hand to demonstrate a gesture they were supposed to use in front of his mother, thumb brushing along her knuckles. It was small, barely a touch, but it lingered. Isabel's breath hitched, just slightly, enough that she hoped he hadn't noticed. He had. And when their eyes met, really met, something flickered between them. Not performance, not planning, something neither of them had put in the contract. Alex cleared his throat and stood abruptly. "We should run through the vineyard story." She nodded, heart racing, unsure why her throat felt tight. They moved to the kitchen island where a bottle of red wine waited, part of a rehearsal dinner scenario. He poured her a glass and they acted out the moment he introduced her to his family for the first time, full of laughter and faux anecdotes. Except some of the laughter was real. She told him about the time she got locked inside her own bookstore because the door handle fell off. He laughed louder than she expected. He told her about a disastrous interview he once gave where he called a journalist by the wrong name 3 times in a row. "You?" She grinned. "Mr. Perfect?" "I'm not perfect," he said. And the way he said it, quiet, almost bitter, made her pause. "You just pretend better than most," she replied gently. Their eyes locked again. Neither looked away. But then Alex's phone buzzed. He checked it. "Sarah." "We should wrap up," he said. "My mother just moved the family dinner an hour earlier. Apparently, her florist cancelled, and it's now a crisis." Isabel blinked. "Do I need to prepare anything specific?" Alex turned to her. "Just be yourself, but polished, measured. My mother reads people like stock forecasts. She'll pick up on anything that feels off." "So, don't be me," she said with a half smile. He tilted his head. "No. Be the version of you that knows exactly who she is and doesn't apologize for it." That made her pause. The way he said it, the way he saw her. It was the first compliment that hadn't sounded like pity. She glanced at her reflection in the sleek, mirrored backsplash, hair slightly curled, blouse tucked perfectly, lips colored with a faint mauve she never wore in the shop. She looked like someone ready for a role, but for the first time she didn't feel like she was disappearing behind it. "I'll be ready," she said. Alex nodded, but as she turned to leave and he watched her go, a quiet dread curled beneath his ribs. He had built this plan to stay in control. So why did it suddenly feel like he was about to lose it? The drive to Lake Forest was long enough for Isabel to memorize every wrinkle in her dress, every line on her palm, every heartbeat that threatened to betray her calm. She sat in the back seat of the sleek black SUV, the city slowly melting into quiet suburbs, lined with maple trees and manicured perfection. Beside her, Alexander was silent. Not cold, just focused. His phone buzzed a few times, but he ignored it. Instead, he sat with his hands clasped, watching the road ahead with the same intensity he gave board meetings. But every so often he'd glance sideways at her, noticing perhaps how her fingers kept folding and unfolding in her lap. "Are you okay?" he asked at one point, his voice softer than she expected. "I'm about to lie to 100 strangers and your mother," Izzy replied, half smiling. What could possibly go wrong? He actually chuckled. "You'll be fine. Just remember, smile, touch my arm occasionally, and whatever you do, don't let her see fear." Sounds like I'm walking into a war zone. He looked at her then. Really looked. That's not far off. The estate appeared through the trees, like something from another world. Massive, elegant, and terrifyingly perfect. Ivory stone, trailing ivy, lanterns already flickering in preparation for the rehearsal dinner, the kind of place that made people lower their voices and stand up straighter. As the car stopped, a valet opened Isabel's door. She stepped out slowly, heels crunching softly on gravel. The autumn air wrapped around her, crisp and floral. She tightened her coat, eyes scanning the front of the estate. She'd imagined this place as cold, extravagant, but nothing had prepared her for the scale of it. Alex joined her, offering his arm. She hesitated for just a beat, then took it. Inside, the house was a symphony of old money. High ceilings, crown molding, a grand staircase sweeping through the foyer like a declaration. Murmurs floated through the air, accompanied by the faint scent of white roses and vintage wine. And then, Eleanor Sterling. She appeared at the top of the staircase like a queen descending from her throne. Slim, silver-haired, wrapped in a tailored navy dress that probably cost more than Isabel's rent. Her expression was polite, but her eyes, sharp, calculating. "Mother," Alex said as they approached, his voice steady. Eleanor's gaze flicked from her son to the woman on his arm. She extended a hand toward Isabel with perfect restraint. "You must be Isabel." "I am," she replied, shaking her hand with gentle confidence. "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Sterling." "The surprise," Eleanor corrected with a smooth smile. "Alex hasn't mentioned you before." "We were keeping things quiet," Alex interjected. "Wanted time to ourselves before the family started asking questions." Eleanor said, eyes still locked on Izzy. "And what is it that you do, dear?" "I run a bookstore," Isabel said, keeping her voice calm, "in Wicker Park. Mostly used books, a few rare editions. I inherited it from my grandmother." Eleanor tilted her head. "How charmingly quaint," Isabel smiled, sensing the subtle sting behind the word. "It's small, yes, but full of stories." "I imagine so," Eleanor murmured. "And is that how you two met?" "At the shop," Alex confirmed. "She helped me find a copy of East of Eden. Signed." Eleanor's brow lifted. "John Steinbeck, I didn't know you read fiction." "He's full of surprises," Isabel said before Alex could answer. "Turns out he has a soft spot for poetic tragedy." Alex glanced at her, surprised. She met his eyes briefly, and something passed between them. A thread of shared performance that was beginning to feel dangerously close to real. Eleanor studied them both. "Well, if you'll excuse me, I need to speak with the caterer. Isabel, we'll chat more later. I look forward to it," Izzy said, even though her heart was pounding. As Eleanor walked away, Alex exhaled. "You did good," he murmured. "She hates me," Izzy replied under her breath. "She hates everyone until they prove her wrong." "Great. So all I have to do is win over a woman who thinks Jane Austen is a kitchen appliance." Alex laughed, loudly, startlingly. Heads turned. Izzy flushed, but he just shook his head. "I forgot what that feels like," he said quietly. "What?" "To laugh like that." She didn't reply. They entered the parlor next, where guests were already sipping champagne. Cousins, investors, old friends from boarding school. All of them turned to look. The moment was choreographed, and yet still felt like walking into a lion's den. Alex introduced her one by one. She smiled, shook hands, remembered names, played the part. And with every laugh, every nod, every story she invented on the spot, something strange happened. She began to enjoy it. Not the performance, the way Alex watched her. At one point during a toast, he leaned down, his breath warm against her ear. "You're stealing the spotlight," he whispered. She turned her head slightly. "Should I tone it down?" "God, no." Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed for dinner, Eleanor approached again, this time with 2 flutes of champagne. "One for the lovely guest," she said, handing one to Izzy, "and one for the woman my son seems quite taken with." Isabel accepted the glass cautiously. Eleanor raised hers. "Two unexpected choices. Two open minds," Izzy replied. Their glasses clinked, and for the first time, Eleanor's smile reached her eyes, just barely. As the night wore on, and the sun dipped below the manicured hedges outside, Isabel found herself walking alone across the terrace. She needed air, space, a moment to breathe. But when she turned around, she wasn't alone. Alex stood in the doorway watching her. "You're doing better than I could have imagined," he said. "You sound surprised." "I am. Because I'm just a bookstore girl playing a part?" "No," he said, "because you're not playing anymore." And just like that, the space between them tightened. Not physically, emotionally. It was a shift she couldn't name, but it was coming, and she wasn't sure she could stop it. The ballroom glowed like a dream, polished by money. Gold sconces cast soft light across tables dressed in ivory linens. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above like frozen constellations. And in the center of it all, Isabel Rossi stood. One hand looped through Alexander Sterling's arm, feeling the weight of every stare that drifted their way. She smiled, laughed at the right moments, let her fingertips linger on his sleeve just long enough to be noticed. And though her heart beat a little too fast and her shoes pinched just enough to hurt, she never let it show, until she saw her. Victoria Langston entered like a storm pretending to be sunshine. Tall, blonde, draped in scarlet satin that clung to her like it had been stitched with venom. Her hair was twisted in a soft updo, earrings glinting like miniature knives. And when she spotted Alex across the room, standing close to Isabel, she tilted her head just slightly, lips curving into a smile that could curdle champagne. Alex stiffened. Isabel felt it in the muscles of his arm. Victoria crossed the room slowly, like she had all the time in the world. Her confidence was terrifying, not just because it was real, but because it was practiced, weaponized. She didn't walk up to Alex. She descended on him. "Alexander," she purred, extending a hand. "You didn't tell me you were bringing company." He released Isabel gently and took Victoria's hand for exactly 1 second. "No more." "Victoria," he said flatly. Victoria turned to Isabel, offering a smile so sweet it stung. "And you must be the new fiancée." "Isabel," she replied, extending her hand with calm grace. "It's a pleasure." Victoria's fingers were cold and perfectly manicured. "Of course it is." The silence that followed was razor-thin. "Alex always did have a weakness for bookish girls," Victoria said, eyes narrowing just slightly. Isabel smiled. "And I've always had a weakness for men who can admit they don't know everything." The flicker in Victoria's expression was subtle, but there. Alex coughed, almost laughing. "Izzy runs a bookstore," he said, "in Wicker Park." "How charming," Victoria replied. "Is it one of those give a book, take a book little huts?" "No," Izzy said, unbothered. "It's an actual store. 4 walls, shelves, real conversations. You'd be surprised how rare that is." Victoria blinked. Alex cleared his throat. "We should get to our table." But Victoria wasn't finished. "So when's the big day?" she asked, her smile sharp. "We haven't picked a date," Alex said quickly. "We're enjoying the engagement," Isabel added, her tone smooth as silk. "Taking it slow, letting it unfold naturally." Victoria leaned closer, as if whispering a secret meant to be heard. "Just be careful, darling. Alex tends to get distracted." That was when Isabel saw it, not just the malice in Victoria's words, but the fear beneath them. She wasn't just trying to intimidate, she was trying to reclaim something. "I'm not worried," Izzy replied softly. "If someone leaves, they were never really yours to begin with." For a moment, the ballroom fell away. There was just the space between the two women, and the man caught in the middle. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Then she turned, offering Alex one last glance that promised chaos. "I'm sure I'll see you both around." She walked away like she owned the floor. Alex let out a breath. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "She's a lot," Izzy said. "That's one word. You dated her." He looked at her, deadpan, briefly, and under duress. She almost laughed. "I can see that." They found their table, seated among extended family and business associates. Izzy kept her posture straight, her expressions measured, but inside, something was shifting. The room was no longer just a stage, it was a chessboard, and Victoria had just made her opening move. Later that night, after 3 rounds of wine, countless introductions, and a particularly awkward toast from a drunk uncle who called Isabel Alex's librarian mistress, she slipped away to the bathroom. She stared at herself in the mirror. The makeup still perfect, the dress still stunning. But her eyes were different. She wasn't afraid of Victoria, not exactly. But she felt the beginning of something dangerous, not from outside, from within. Because even though everything between her and Alex was an arrangement, the way he looked at her across the room, the way his fingers had found the small of her back when she stumbled slightly during a dance, it was starting to feel like something more. And that scared her more than Victoria ever could. When she returned to the ballroom, Victoria was dancing with one of Alex's cousins. She spotted Isabel immediately, smirked, and leaned in to whisper something into the man's ear. He laughed loudly. Izzy sat down. Alex joined her a moment later, watching Victoria out of the corner of his eye. "She's not going to stop," he said quietly. "I know. We can end this. Walk away. Tonight." Isabel looked at him. Really looked. And then shook her head. "No, we finish what we started." Because somewhere deep down she knew this wasn't just about pretending anymore. It was about surviving and maybe, just maybe, winning. The following day unfolded like a pageant of curated beauty. Floral arrangements arrived in crates, guests filtered through the estate in tailored suits and silk dresses, and the air hummed with champagne and carefully measured laughter. But under all that gloss, something more honest was beginning to bloom, and it had nothing to do with the wedding. After brunch with extended family and a tedious round of photos on the lawn, Alex and Isabel found themselves momentarily alone beneath a white canopy near the back gardens. It was the first time since arriving that no one was watching. "You survived the morning," Alex said, offering her a half-smile. "I deserve a medal, or cake, possibly both." He chuckled, then gestured to a waiter passing with a tray. "Cake I can do." She reached for a slice of lemon tart, then paused. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "I expected to hate all of this. The games, the eyes, the pretending, but..." "But?" She looked down at the tart in her hand. "It feels real sometimes, like we're not faking." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in the white wicker chair, watching her. The wind lifted a strand of hair from her shoulder. She didn't brush it away. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't feel heavy or awkward, but safe, easy. "You don't talk much about your past," she said eventually. "Not much to say." "I doubt that." He looked at her then. "You want the truth?" "Always." He nodded, then exhaled. "My father was brilliant, also emotionally absent. My mother, well, you've met her. Expectations were the language of love in my house. Success was currency. Emotion was inefficient." Izzy's eyes softened. "And Victoria?" He hesitated. "She was exactly what my mother wanted. Beautiful, polished, strategic, but she never really saw me. Just the potential of who I could be for her." "And me?" Izzy asked. "What does your mother think I am?" He smirked. "A distraction, a threat, possibly a hallucination." She laughed. "Well, at least I'm memorable." Later that afternoon, the music started. A string quartet filled the open courtyard with delicate melodies, inviting couples to dance. The crowd migrated toward the marble terrace, where a makeshift dance floor had been set up beneath fairy lights and hanging roses. Alex looked at her. "Do you dance?" "I survive," she said. He offered his hand. She hesitated, just long enough to feel her heart thump once, loudly. Then she took it. He guided her to the center, his hand settling at her waist, the other enclosing hers. It was strange how natural it felt, how her body found rhythm in his without thinking. The world narrowed to the music, the warmth of his palm, and the silence between their words. "You know," she whispered, "you're not as cold as you pretend to be." He raised an eyebrow. "You think I pretend? I think you hide." He didn't deny it. "I'm not used to being looked at the way you look at me," she added. "How do I look at you?" "Like I matter." Alex didn't speak. His eyes dropped to her lips just briefly. The dance continued, slow, unspoken. And then came a shift. She stumbled slightly, her heel catching on the stone. He caught her, hands firm at her waist, pulling her closer than before. They didn't move, didn't breathe. Her hand was on his chest now. She could feel his heartbeat, steady, strong, just like hers. For a moment, everything stilled. No laughter, no eyes, just the closeness, the possibility. "Izzy," he began. But before he could finish, a voice interrupted them. "Well, well, I see the show is going on beautifully." Victoria. She stood near the edge of the dance floor, arms crossed, watching with that perfect, poisonous smile. Alex's expression tightened, but Izzy smiled. "Would you like to join us?" she asked, voice calm. "Oh, I'd hate to intrude on such passionate choreography." Alex stepped in. "We're busy, Victoria." "I can see that." Her eyes lingered. "Just don't forget, weddings are short. Reputations last longer." She turned and walked away. Izzy stepped back slightly. "She's not going to stop," she said. "She's predictable," he replied. "You, on the other hand..." He didn't finish, but she saw it in his eyes. Admiration, respect, and something else she didn't have a name for yet. They walked off the dance floor together, and the world resumed spinning around them. But in the quiet space between them, something had shifted again, and this time, it wasn't pretending. The evening unfolded under strings of glowing bulbs and the hum of expensive laughter. The rehearsal dinner had transformed the estate gardens into something out of a romantic film. Tables dressed in white linen, soft jazz drifting through the air, and waiters moving like ghosts with trays of champagne. But for Isabel, the night felt tighter than her dress. She smiled when spoken to, answered questions with grace, even complimented an aunt's brooch that looked like it belonged in a museum vault. Yet something coiled beneath her skin, a tension she couldn't name until Victoria reappeared. It was during the second toast, just as guests were settling into their seats. Izzy and Alex stood near the main table, mingling with cousins and investors, when a glass of red wine was offered to her by a server. She barely had time to thank him before a shoulder brushed hers, and the wine spilled, deep crimson blooming across her cream-colored dress. Gasps echoed. Someone cursed under their breath. "Oh no," Victoria said, dramatically reaching forward. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see you there." Isabel blinked, frozen. The liquid was already seeping into the fabric, warm and mortifying. Alex stepped forward instantly. "Victoria," he said, his voice sharp. Too sharp. Victoria feigned innocence. "It was an accident. Really?" "No, it wasn't," Alex replied coldly, eyes locked on hers. "And you're better than this. At least, you used to be." The hush that followed was brief but biting. Victoria's expression hardened for the first time. She turned and walked away without another word. A waiter rushed over with towels. Another brought soda water. Izzy was still motionless. Alex leaned in. "Come with me." He guided her out of the crowd, around the side of the estate to a quiet hallway just off the garden. There he pulled a linen napkin from his jacket pocket and dabbed at the worst of the stain. She watched his hands move, careful, deliberate, slightly shaking. "You didn't have to defend me," she said softly. "Yes," he answered. "I did. You could have let it go. She has influence here." He looked up, and for once there was no performance in his eyes. "So do I." She laughed, short, bitter. "I'm not your responsibility, Alex." "No," he said, "you're not. But you're under my protection, and that matters to me." She stepped back. "Why?" He didn't answer, because they both knew the answer was dangerous. He cleared his throat. "Let's find you a new dress." Sarah packed an extra. "I can handle it." "I know you can," he said. "That's why I'm asking to help." And just like that, the walls she'd built began to tremble. Not fall. Not yet. But tremble. Minutes later, dressed in a navy gown that hugged her figure differently, but no less stunningly, Isabel returned to the dinner with Alex at her side. She held her chin high. She met every stare with calm fire. And when she passed Victoria, she smiled, not sweetly but with something stronger. Unbothered power. The rest of the evening passed in a daze of dancing, clinking glasses and veiled comments. But then, something unexpected shifted the ground beneath her again. A man named Charles, tall, polished and too charming, approached during a lull in the music. "May I steal her for a dance?" he asked Alex, motioning to Isabel. Alex's jaw tightened. Isabel glanced between them, amused. "That depends. Are you a good dancer?" "Only when I'm motivated," Charles replied, offering his hand. She took it. As they moved toward the floor, Alex's gaze followed her, cool, unreadable. The music started. Charles pulled her close. "You don't look like you belong to this world." "And yet here I am," she replied. "I'd say you're the most interesting person here." She smiled politely. "Is that a line or a compliment?" "Whichever gets me another dance." She didn't answer. But when the song ended and she turned to step away, she caught sight of Alex leaning against a pillar, arms crossed, jaw tight. Jealousy was a curious thing. It didn't suit him, and yet it made him look more human than ever before. Back at the table, he said nothing. Not until everyone else was occupied and they were alone again. "You didn't have to say yes to him," Alex muttered. "He asked. I was polite." You were more than polite. She raised an eyebrow. Are you accusing me of something? No, he said. I didn't like it. Izzy stared at him. Why? The word hung between them. He looked away. Forget it. But she didn't. She couldn't. That night, long after guests had retired to their suites, Isabel stood on the balcony outside her room. The estate was quiet now, only crickets and distant laughter in the wind. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring up at the stars. This wasn't just a job anymore, it hadn't been for days. But the part that scared her most, she didn't want it to end. Not because of the money, not even because of the fairy tale setting. Because somewhere between the first rehearsal and that spilled glass of wine, she had started to care. And now she wasn't sure who she was protecting more, Alex or herself. It was past midnight when the mansion finally exhaled. The final string notes of the quartet had faded. The last guests had slipped off to their rooms, shoes in hand and secrets on their tongues. And Isabel Rossi, unable to sleep, wandered barefoot down the grand staircase with only silence and her thoughts to keep her company. The night was still warm, the scent of white peonies lingering in the air. She wore a soft robe, borrowed from the suite, her hair undone, cascading around her shoulders. She wasn't looking for anything, only air, only peace, but fate had other plans. As she neared the back corridor leading toward the wine cellar, a low voice stopped her in her tracks. Victoria. She was on the phone, her words sharp as glass, slicing through the quiet. No, I'm telling you, she's not who she says she is, Victoria whispered. I did some digging. Her name is Isabel Rossi. She runs a failing bookstore in some hipster corner of the city. Doesn't come from money, doesn't belong here. There was a pause, then a laugh. No, it gets better. She's not even his real fiancée. It's a deal, a contract. I saw the signature myself. Thank God for Sarah's poor email habits. 15 grand for 3 days of pretending. Isabel froze. Her breath caught like the air had turned to cement. Victoria continued. Oh, I'm going to expose her. Tomorrow. In front of everyone. Right after the brunch, before the wedding ceremony. Alex won't know what hit him. The blood drained from Izzy's face. She stepped back slowly, carefully, until her heel brushed against the edge of a pillar. It made the faintest noise. Enough. Victoria turned, but the corridor was already empty. Isabel ran. Not far, but far enough to catch her breath. She leaned against the wall outside the library, pressing a hand to her chest. Her heart thudded wildly, like it too had been caught in a lie. Victoria knew, and she wasn't bluffing. Izzy stood there for several minutes, trying to calm the tremble in her limbs. Her thoughts ran in frantic loops. Tell Alex. No. He'd blame her. Walk away. No. She'd lose everything. Confront Victoria. No. She'd already lost the upper hand. Eventually, she slipped back to her suite. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for the damage to begin. Inside, she sat on the edge of the bed. Her reflection stared back at her from the full-length mirror across the room. She didn't recognize the woman staring back, not because of the dress or the makeup or the luxury, but because of the fear. She had been brave until now, steady. But tonight, everything threatened to crumble. If Victoria exposed her in front of Alex's family, she'd lose all of it, the money, the plan, the last thread of dignity she was trying to hold on to. But worse than that, she'd lose him. She hadn't meant to care. But now, the thought of him looking at her with disappointment, with betrayal, it pierced deeper than she wanted to admit. That was the part Victoria didn't understand. It wasn't just about the contract anymore. It was about the quiet moments, the way Alex smiled at her when no one was watching, the way he listened when she talked about books, about her grandmother, about the little life she'd tried to build from dust. Those things couldn't be faked, and now they were in danger. The next morning, the sky was silver with fog. The estate buzzed quietly, staff moving trays, florists arranging final touches, guests stirring from their suites. Isabel stood at the mirror, applying light makeup with hands that refused to stay still. Her face looked calm. Her voice, when she rehearsed polite responses, sounded steady. But inside, a war. When Alex came to pick her up for the brunch, he looked rested, calm. A slight smile tugged at his mouth when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words stuck. He stepped closer, his voice low. "Is everything okay?" She forced the corners of her mouth into a soft smile. "Just nerves." He studied her face as if trying to read something between the lines. "Don't be nervous," he whispered. "You've been perfect." That word, perfect. It scraped against her ribs. She looked away. As they walked together into the garden where brunch was being held, Isabel scanned the crowd. Eleanor was by the fountain directing a waiter with military precision. Victoria hadn't arrived yet. Every step felt like a countdown. Alex was greeted with admiration and warmth. He moved through the crowd like someone accustomed to being adored, but he never let go of her hand. She wondered if he could feel her trembling through it. The speeches began, short, toasts of gratitude, laughter. Izzy felt her heart slam harder with each minute. And then Victoria appeared, draped in white, an intentional slap in the face. Izzy's grip on Alex's hand tightened instinctively. Victoria gave her a smile from across the lawn. Not sweet, victorious. Alex leaned over and whispered something funny. Isabel smiled on instinct, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. She had 12 hours left. 12 hours to play the part. 12 hours before the bomb dropped. And for the first time, Isabel Rossi, who had always believed in stories, in hope in turning pages, was terrified of the ending. The wedding brunch had unfolded under the timid sun, but as the final speeches wound down and guests settled into their mimosas and gossip, something in the air shifted. Isabel felt it in her spine, like an approaching storm that only she could sense. Victoria was seated 2 tables away, smiling too much, speaking too little. Her silence, her restraint, it was uncharacteristic, and that made it lethal. Alex, unaware, laughed softly beside Izzy, his hand resting on her lower back in a casual, protective way that had grown more familiar with every passing hour. She had almost forgotten about the threat. Almost. Until the clinking began. A fork against glass. Subtle, then louder. Heads turned. Victoria stood. Graceful, composed, deadly. "Forgive me," she said, raising her glass. "But before we toast to love and forever, I believe there's something we all deserve to know." Alex straightened slowly. Izzy felt her stomach flip. "I've always believed honesty is the best gift you can give someone before marriage," Victoria continued, "especially when the entire relationship has been, well, fictional." Whispers, shifting in chairs. Eleanor blinked. Alex's jaw tensed. "Victoria, don't." But she ignored him. "I happen to know," she said, turning toward the guests, "that this charming little engagement isn't real at all. In fact, there's a contract, signed, dated. $15,000 for 1 weekend of lies. Isn't that right, Isabel?" Silence, complete, devastating. Isabel couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every eye turned to her. She searched for Alex's gaze, but he wasn't looking at her. Not yet. Victoria kept going. "She's not his fiancée. She's not from our world. She's not even a guest. She's hired. And frankly, it's insulting to all of us." A few gasps. One aunt clutched her pearls so dramatically it might have been rehearsed. "And then," Eleanor stood. "Is this true?" Alex finally turned. To Isabel. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. She could feel the shame crawling up her throat like fire. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry. Not here, not like this. But her voice cracked. "Yes," she said quietly. "It's true." Another wave of gasps. "But," she added, stepping forward, "it wasn't supposed to mean anything. I signed a contract. I needed the money. That's all it was meant to be." Alex still hadn't said a word. And that was the worst part. The silence, the weight of his stillness. She looked up at him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have told you." Victoria turned toward Alex, triumphant. "There. Now everyone knows. And you, Alex, you can stop pretending too. Let's stop embarrassing ourselves." Another beat of silence, then Alex moved. Slowly, deliberately. He walked to Izzy and took her hand. She blinked. "What are you—" But he wasn't looking at her. He turned to the crowd. "She's right," he said clearly. There was a contract. It started as a lie. The murmurs grew. Eleanor sat down slowly, speechless for once. "But what no one expected," Alex continued, his voice unwavering, "is that somewhere between the pretending and the performance, something real happened." He looked down at Isabel then, and when their eyes met, there was no anger, no betrayal, just truth. "I didn't plan on falling in love with her," he said, "but I did." A wave of stunned silence passed over the garden like wind through wheat. Victoria's face drained of color. "She's not part of my world," he went on. "She doesn't come from money. She doesn't know our rules, and that's exactly why I love her." He squeezed Izzy's hand. "Because she reminded me what honesty actually looks like." Tears blurred Isabel's vision. "Alex, I choose her," he said simply. "Not because of who you think she is, but because of who I know she is." And then he kissed her, in front of everyone, not rushed, not showy, real. The kind of kiss that silenced rooms, the kind of kiss that made people believe in beginnings. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "Why?" His answer was soft. "Because you told the truth. When you had everything to lose, no one clapped, no one dared." The only sound was the wind through the hedges. Victoria stood frozen, lips parted in shock. And Eleanor? She simply turned and walked away. The crowd began to scatter after that, slowly, awkwardly, politely. A few curious stares lingered, a few mutters followed, but the moment had passed. Alex and Isabel stood alone under the canopy of white roses. "I ruined your brunch," she whispered, trying to smile through her tears. He laughed gently. "You saved it." She shook her head. "I don't know what happens next." "Neither do I," he said. And for once, uncertainty didn't feel like a threat. It felt like freedom. But deep down, both of them knew, whatever came next, they would have to decide alone and separately. Because even love born from a lie needs time to become real. The city looked different when she returned to it. Colder, quieter, as if the world had shifted ever so slightly while she'd been pretending to belong in another one. Isabel unlocked the door of the bookstore slowly, the familiar creak echoing into the silence. Dust had settled on the windows. A forgotten teacup waited on the counter like it had been holding its breath. She stepped inside. Home. And yet, not the same. She dropped her bag by the register and stood still for a long time, listening to the quiet. No music, no footsteps, no one waiting in the next room with a glass of wine and an unexpected smile. The weekend felt like a fever dream now. Glittering dresses, fake smiles, real touches. Alex's hand on her waist, his voice whispering her name like a secret. And the kiss. God, that kiss. She still felt it, still tasted the truth of it. But he hadn't called. Not after everything. Not after the crowd dispersed and his family whispered and his mother walked away without a word. Not even after he told her he loved her in front of everyone. The silence that followed was worse than anger. It was emptiness. 2 days passed, then 3. Isabel reopened the shop, slowly, cautiously. A few loyal customers came in, asking how her weekend had gone. She offered vague smiles and said she'd been at a wedding. No one asked more, no one ever really did. By Thursday, she stopped expecting to see his name on her phone, stopped looking out the window when a black car passed, stopped letting her chest ache every time the bell over the door jingled. But the ache didn't leave. It just learned how to sit still. Across the city, Alex sat in his office, staring at a blank email draft. He'd written her name 5 times, deleted it 6. How do you write to someone you told the truth too late? His days were full, meetings, proposals, analysts demanding answers. His mother hadn't spoken to him since the brunch. Investors wanted reassurance, but none of it mattered. Not really. He heard her voice everywhere, in the margins of books, in the spaces between elevator chimes, in the pauses before he answered questions. His penthouse felt colder, bigger, wrong. He had tried to go back to the way things were, But how do you go back after someone has taught you how to feel again? On Friday morning, he stood by the window with coffee in hand and the memory of her head resting on his chest, the way she laughed with her whole face, the way she touched books like they were sacred. He didn't need a contract anymore. He needed closure, or something more dangerous. Hope. Saturday morning. Grey clouds, warm wind, the kind of day that felt undecided. Isabel rearranged the poetry section with half a heart. The rain had kept customers away, and she was glad for the solitude. She was kneeling on the floor, sliding books into place when she heard the door open. The bell rang. She didn't look up. "Give me a minute," she called out gently. "I'll be right with you." No answer. Just silence. And then, "I'm here for a first edition." Her body froze. That voice. She looked up, and there he was, Alexander Sterling, in her shop, in a dark sweater and jeans, looking more undone than she'd ever seen him. No armor, no schedule, no script, just him, and the weight of everything they hadn't said. Izzy stood slowly. "I don't have anything rare today," she said softly. He nodded. "I didn't come for rare." She crossed her arms, not defensively, just to keep them from shaking. "You disappeared. I needed to think. You told me you loved me," she whispered. "I still do." The air trembled between them. "I don't know what's real anymore," she said. He took a slow breath. "I came to fix a shelf." That caught her off guard. She blinked. "What?" He pointed behind her. "That one, the one that's always slanted. I noticed it the first time I saw this place." She turned. The third shelf from the right. It leaned just enough to be noticed, but only by someone paying attention. She looked back at him. "I don't need it fixed." "I know," he said, "but I still want to." And just like that, something broke open. Not loudly, not in a rush, but in the quiet way hope returns after winter. She stepped aside. He knelt, inspecting the shelf. No fancy tools, just his hands, just presence. When he looked up again, she was sitting on the floor across from him, legs crossed, watching. "Did you really mean it?" she asked. "Every word. Even the parts where you said you didn't plan this." He nodded. "Especially those." They didn't kiss. Not yet. But there, surrounded by stories and silence and the smell of old pages, something shifted again. Not like before. This time neither of them was pretending. A week had passed since Alex walked into her bookstore, not as a CEO, not as a man trying to fix an image, but as someone willing to start again, on her floor, with no plan, no performance, no expectations. Since then, he had shown up every day, sometimes with breakfast, sometimes with tools, always with quiet presence. He didn't talk much about the company or his family. He asked questions about her shelves, her favorite authors, what her grandmother used to serve with tea. He started shelving books alphabetically. Wrong at first, then better. One morning, he fixed the crooked bell above the door. Another day, he labeled the back room for donations. It was never dramatic, but it was real. And that's what broke her. Not with pain, with peace. On a Thursday morning, rain tapped gently against the bookstore windows. The city outside moved slowly, and inside the smell of cinnamon and paper filled the air. Isabel was behind the counter, reading a dog-eared copy of The Secret Garden when Alex stepped inside. He held 2 coffees and something else, a folder. She raised an eyebrow. "You bringing back the contract?" He smiled. "Something like that. But you'll want to read this one." She narrowed her eyes but took the folder. Inside was a proposal. Not romantic. Not yet. A business one. From Sterling Innovations, a funding partnership for Rossi Books. No conditions, no ownership. Just a commitment to preserve independent literature, community programs, and historic small businesses. She blinked, reading the fine print. "This is real?" "As real as you," he said softly. "As us." She looked up. "Why?" "Because I believe in this place," he said. "Because I believe in you." He paused, then stepped closer. "And because I want to build something that lasts, with you. Not just this. Us." She swallowed hard. "This doesn't come with another contract. No papers, no rules, no countdown." "Then what do you want, Alex?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Isabel froze. "You said once," he whispered, "that real love isn't performance, it's showing up, it's doing the work." He opened the box. Inside, no diamond, just a silver ring, simple, unpolished, etched with tiny vines like the ones that grew around her bookstore door. "I don't want to buy your yes," he said. "I want to earn it every day." She didn't cry, not right away, but when he slipped the ring into her hand, not onto her finger, and said, "You decide when," her heart cracked wide open. She nodded, then smiled. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Months later, the bookstore thrived. With Alex's support, but not his control, Izzy launched community reading nights, restored the children's corner, and reopened the tiny tea bar her grandmother once loved. Alex came in almost daily, sometimes to help, sometimes just to sit in the corner with a book and watch her. One afternoon, a small girl wandered in with her mother and asked if this was the place where the fairy lady reads stories. Izzy smiled. "Yes, it is." Alex watched her from the fiction section, and when their eyes met, they both knew they had rewritten the story. No longer bound by roles or fear or contracts, just two people who had met in the most unlikely way and found everything they weren't looking for, together. She didn't win by following the script. She won when she abandoned the script and chose to feel. She won when she opened the door to the bookstore and found, among shelves and silences, a love that didn't ask for applause, only presence. Because sometimes what starts as a lie ends up being the most beautiful truth. And perhaps deep down, this story is also about us. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know. Where are you listening to this message from? Your support is what allows us to continue bringing stories like this.